Hello again, everyone. I'm Dr. George Simon, and welcome to another edition of the new Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we've been in for some time now, and that affects almost every aspect of our lives. In fact, every aspect of our lives when you think about it, and some thoughts about what we can do about it. And in the recent episodes, we have been delving into the important life principles that I have been writing about in an upcoming book. Principles that, when properly embraced and practiced, can help anyone become a person of decent character. And these life principles and axioms are so critical to our character formation. It's been it's become a lost art of sorts, fostering character development in young folks and encouraging further character growth in adults. It's become a lost art of sorts. We don't pay character attention anymore. We don't pay it the kind of attention that we need to. We don't afford it the status that we once did. And as a result, we're paying a very steep price in every aspect of our lives, from our relationships to our social institutions, to our civic affairs, to our politics, even our sports. Everything has been affected by this, which is why the title of this program, Character Matters. It matters more than we know. And I've dedicated my professional as well as my personal life to the exploration of these issues. And I want to talk about some of them today. We have been discussing what I call the first three commandments of good character. And they all relate very heavily to this phenomenon we are learning so much more about these days of narcissism, because it is the dominant feature of our times. Narcissism is pretty rampant in all of its many forms and levels of expression. And as I first made a point of in my book, Character Disturbance, character pathology is indeed a spectrum phenomenon, as we've learned about so many other mental health issues that exist along various spectra. Character disturbance is a spectrum phenomenon of both type and degree, and that's the case with narcissism. There are various types of expression of narcissism. Narcissism plays a role in many character disturbances. It has many different expressions and levels of severity, and it affects relationships in different ways. But the first three commandments that I've been talking about are pivotal to overcoming the narcissistic tendencies that we have so deeply embedded into our culture these days and are producing so much character disturbance. So I want to spend some time today just going over the basics of the first three commandments and then delving a little further into the third commandment that we've been talking about, which has to do with developing a balanced sense of self-worth. Now, to recap what we've been talking about just a little bit over the past couple of weeks, commandment number one has to do with overcoming our inherent egocentricity, overcoming the tendency, the very natural tendency, to see the world as an extension of ourselves and to be relatively self-focused and to not appreciate the many intricate ways in which we are actually all interconnected. to realize at a deeper level the nature of our place in this great universe, and to appreciate the impact that our very presence has on the rest of creation. Folks who are stuck in this stage of their development um, end up having a whole lot of narcissism in their character. They tend to see themselves at the center of the universe. They tend to see everything that they like as extensions of themselves. If they see themselves in somebody else or something else, they like what they see. And if they see something different, something that doesn't honor them, something that doesn't pad their already inflated ego, then they have a distaste for it. You can see this in narcissistic characters in so many ways. Uh, and many times their interest in you can be very sadly mistaken for a positive regard of you. Many times, what they're drawn to is something about you that reminds them of them. And because it's only them that they can really love, the fact that they gravitate toward you because they see in you something that reminds them of them can make you feel like you have someone who actually really regards you on your hands, when in fact you're in a relationship with someone who can only uh, positively regard themselves. So that commandment, that first commandment about outgrowing this natural inherent egocentricity, and not only appreciating the bigger picture, but appreciating how we best fit within that picture, how we best fit within the big scheme of things, how we impact everything else and everyone else in this vast creation. So that's commandment number one, the first step toward positive character growth. Step two that we talked about, commandment number two, has to do with overcoming any sense of entitlement and understanding at a very fundamental level how how inherently indebted we are for this magnificent unearned gift of life. And We talked a little bit last week about how folks can have a whole lot of difficulty finding appreciation in their heart, especially if they grow up in circumstances where they feel denied, deprived, discounted, unattended to, abused, maybe, or any other way traumatized. Folks can have a difficult time uh, feeling appreciative and feeling like they have a debt to pay. They can feel like they're owed something, that they've been cheated. They can be extra hungry for things. They can become greedy, harbor resentments, a whole host of other unhealthy attitudes that get in the way of positive character growth. But mostly they feel that they've been cheated and that they're owed something. You can also get the feeling this way, not just out of deprivation, but being given too much. Folks can be spoiled. They can be handed things merely for existing. They can come to expect too much just for being on the planet. So it's easy to develop these feelings of entitlement that are always detrimental to our character. And then we come to commandment number three, which has to do with developing a balanced sense of self. And to even begin to master this commandment, you have to really have progressed uh, to some degree along mastery of the first two. You have to some degree, have overcome any inherent egocentricity. To see the bigger picture, you have to have overcome any unhealthy sense of entitlement and come to appreciate the uh, profound gift that this life is. And then you have to develop a right head about you. And to do that, a really important spiritual principle is at stake. You have to know what your worth not only truly is, neither in an inflated sense or depressed sense. You have to know what your genuine worth is, and you also have to know where that worth comes from. What brings you worth? Because there are so many ways in our character disturbed society, there are so many ways to become involved in unhealthy relationships as a result of looking in the wrong place and in the wrong way for a sense of self worth. I know all too many people, for example, who predicate their feelings of worth on the affirmation and approval of others. So they are entirely dependent on external sources of validation and approval for their sense of worth. This is almost always a disaster within relationships. So, in another episode, I'll delve into this more deeply. Now, psychology has made two serious mistakes over the last few decades when it comes to self esteem. For a long time, for a long time, we were telling folks that you could never have too much self esteem, that it simply wasn't possible. And that every malady, just about every problematic aspect of one's personal development was in some way related to a lack of positive opinion about oneself. We also taught folks that whenever we see what looks like ego inflation, whenever we see pomposity, braggadocio, whenever we see this face of inflated self worth, that it's really a compensation for underlying feelings of insecurity and low self worth. Now, this can indeed be true, but it's absolute folly, especially in our day and time, to believe that this is always the case. In fact, in our day and time, because of a lot of sociocultural factors, it's rarely the case. Some people, many people who act all that really do believe they're all that, whether they're justified in believing that or not on the basis of any objective evidence. So we've been wrong about that, and it's had some negative consequences. We, for example, believed a similar thing about bullies. For a long time, we taught people that underneath it all, bullies are really cowards, that they're struggling with their own low sense of self worth and they build themselves up at the expense of others. Ample research has demonstrated that this is just simply not true most of the time. But we believe that because our old theories about why people do the things they do pretty much dictated that, pretty much uh, hypothesized those kinds of dynamics. But over and over and over again, the research supports a much different point of view. And I have to say, it's a bit edifying because when I first began doing my clinical case study research, everything was pointing to the kinds of notions that we now know from research are valid. But in the time that I was first writing about it, very few folks believed. So when I was doing workshops in the early days, many folks allied with the old psychology and with the old theories about why people did the things that they did and became the people that they became. Many of these folks did not like what I had to say, and some of them even walked out. This has not been the case for many years now, but in any case, it was early so because of the dominance of our old traditional notions about what makes people tick. So it turns out, just as my clinical case study research was indicating years ago, that people can and do think too much of themselves, and so for some very interesting reasons. Not the least of which is that they sometimes pride themselves for the wrong things. It turns out, according to the research, and this is something I learned a long time ago, long before the research supported it, turns out that you can praise little Johnny or little Susie too much, and you can praise them for the wrong things. When you notice and give them accolades for things that they can't legitimately claim the credit for, when you tell them what beautiful blue eyes they have over and over again, how talented they are, how smart they are, endowments of nature, gifts of God, if you will. If you praise them for these things, tell them to laud in themselves these things, claim them as their own without appropriate reverence for the giver, you will indeed help them to develop a pretty fat head. Similarly, individuals who don't have so much going for them in the way of those gifts and aptitudes, in the way of fortunate circumstances, can feel really pretty lousy about themselves. What really gives a person a positive sense of self and leads to something called self respect, as opposed to just self esteem, is what they do with what they have been given, how they conduct themselves, not all that they are, but all that they do, what they have made of themselves, how they have used what they have been given, not only for themselves, but for the greater good. And of course, you don't come to any appreciation for doing anything for the greater good unless you've mastered the first two commandments that I've been talking about, namely appreciating that we're all connected, that we have impact, and that we need to be mindful of this impact, and that we need not take anything for granted. Now, developing a positive sense of self worth requires an incredible amount of humility. It involves sizing ourselves up honestly, unreservedly. And we're going to be talking more about the importance of honest self reckoning when we get to that particular commandment a few episodes down the way. But suffice it to say that developing a healthy and balanced sense of self is critical to sound character. We have to know who we are, we have to know our inherent worth, and we have to know where that worth derives. In my book, The Judas Syndrome, I speak from a spiritual perspective on this. Folks with evolved spirituality know deeply from whence their worth derives. And they have overcome the tendency, therefore, to look in all the wrong places I mentioned earlier that we'll be focusing in another episode a little bit more heavily on this tendency of some folks to look to people, places, and things, to look externally for validation of worth. This almost always leads to an unhealthy sense of dependency. It can even lead to addiction. It can lead to addiction to another person, especially if that person is adept at the art of ego massage, knows how to make you feel good about yourself. They may not be a very good character otherwise. They may actually end up in some way abusing and exploiting you. But so long as they give you that validation you seek, you keep coming back for more. This commandment is pretty pivotal. Without a right head about you, you can't grow. You can't grow in character. You can't become the person that we're all meant to be. You can't realize your full potential. It's not just true if your self-worth is predicated on what others think of you. Because if you think too much of yourself and you fail to give adequate credit where it is due to the ultimate gift giver, and you don't have to be particularly religious about it, you can have respect for nature itself and for the endowments that it's conferred upon you. And you can come to realize your place in nature. You don't have to be particularly religious to be solidly spiritually grounded in a sense of deep indebtedness and appreciation for the gifts that you have and a desire to lovingly give of yourself and give back. And that will help you develop a more positive sense of self. You are not synonymous with your nature endowments, but you are responsible for how you use them. And you don't get the credit for what's been given to you, but you do get all the credit for what you do with what you've been given. And that is the heart of healthy self-regard. Humbly acknowledging, humbly acknowledging your gifts and your place, and then wanting to be a part, giving of yourself, giving of your gifts, and not attaching yourself to the outcome, because that is also not in your power to control. I know an awful lot of people who do an awful lot of loving and get pretty depressed because they don't see it having an impact. They give and give and give in their relationships. They engage in charitable acts. They don't see much changing. And they get down in the dumps and they wonder, what am I doing this for? Well, the reason to do any of it is for your benefit, for your personal, spiritual, character growth. It's good for you. It's good for your character. And it's good ultimately for your emotional, psychological, and spiritual health to have a right head about you, to neither think too much of yourself or too little, to know your worth deeply and not to predicate it on what other people say or do, or circumstances, how much money you have, how much success you've achieved in business or something else. These are all things that can lead us astray, give us a false sense of security about ourselves and our worth. Only the truly evolved character knows not only what he or she is worth, but where that worth comes from. Now, in the next episode, we are going to be focusing much more deeply on all of those factors that can inflate a person's sense of self and a sense of self-worth, and the dangers of that to our character. Ultimately, this enterprise that we're all involved with, this human experience, is about learning to love, developing the capacity to truly love. A lot of things masquerade as love. A lot of things masquerade as love. Some things come close, but love is love. And mature love requires character. We can't truly love until we have fashioned ourselves into beings capable of genuine love. It's natural and instinctual for us to desire certain things, but desire itself is not love. It's natural and instinctual to become enamored of certain things, but being enamored or being in love is not in itself love. And there are so many things that can hold us back from evolving into the kinds of persons truly capable of genuine love. And the evidence that so many of us are arrested in this development is all around us. Families don't stay together. Marriages don't hold together. Communities are torn apart. Deals can't be confidently closed on a handshake. It's not safe for unaccompanied children to ride the bus. So many aspects of our lives reflect what's happened to us in the way of character deterioration. We are not who we can be. And there are clear reasons for this, not the least of which is it's extremely hard in our day and time to develop a positive and healthy and especially balanced sense of self. So on the next edition of the new Character Matters, we're going to be talking, as I said, much more deeply on the dangers of an inflated or out of whack sense of self. All the things that can accompany that, and all the ways that it negatively impacts relationships. Going to explain why so many relationships these days are so shallow and go south eventually. So I hope you'll join me next time for another edition of the new Character Matters. And I hope you'll also avail yourself of my books and the numerous articles on my blog site at drgeorgesimon.com. That's drgeorgesimon.com. My books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, Character Disturbance, the Phenomenon of Our Age, the Judas Syndrome, and How Did We End Up Here, all available and in multiple formats on Amazon and available through your local bookseller. If they don't have it on the shelves, as they might not, you can always procure it just by asking for it, having it ordered. And I thank you for tuning in to this edition, and I'll see you next time on another installment of the new Character Matters. I'm Dr. George Simon. Take care.